let me start with my first story, and the one that'll, it's almost ridiculous, but that's what it was. But my first job, they took me to the traffic department. And they always give the new guy and the young guy the bad jobs, the dirty jobs, the greasy jobs. And so I'm in the traffic department, and I got a stack of bill of ladings that deep, and my job was to file them. And that meant you had to get on your hands and knees and take them one at a time on a tile cement floor and put them where they're supposed to be. Well, I'm sitting here, and hell, I'm making, I don't even know, $4 or $5 an hour. I've never made that kind of money. They could ask me to do anything. But anyway, I'm there on my hands and knees, and here's this older man dressed like $1 million, and he's walking by me, one of these half walls, and he gets about 20 feet by me, and he spins around and puts his hand on the top rail, and he starts staring at me. And he stood there staring at me for what seemed like 10 or 15 minutes. And I thought, I don't even know who he is, you know. But he was making me nervous. But anyway, he turned around and went back past me, and he went in the traffic manager's office, Charlie Bigelow, shut the door, and he started screaming at the guy. I mean, screaming at everybody. There's 200-300 people out in that office, and every one of them could hear everything he was saying. But old Charlie Bigelow was just bouncing off the ceiling there, see, and I'm sitting there. Anyway, he turns around, opens the door, and starts to walk out, and he turns back to Charlie, and he says, if that man doesn't have a white shirt on by tomorrow, I want him fired. White shirt. Good God, I understood that. and that's the way things were back in the day. And thankfully those days are gone. But anyway, he leaves, and the assistant manager came in and looks at me, and he says, Neil, have you got a white shirt? I says, hell no, white shirt. And he says, well, can you get one by tomorrow? And I said, well, let me call my mom, you know, old mom. Now, there's only, what is there, 2 ladies here? You guys are underrepresented. But I says, if I don't have a white shirt by tomorrow, they're going to fire me. And so she tells my dad, and she says, well, there was no Walmart back in those days, so Mellencamp Men's Store up in Ypsilanti, so she tells Dad, we got to go buy a white shirt. And he says, no, you don't buy a white shirt, you got to buy 2. She says, we don't have money for 2. And he says, I'll take care of it. So he goes up and talks to the Mellencamp guy and says, hey, we need 2 white shirts. Can we pay for them next week? And he says, well, sure. You know, that's the way things were back in the day. But anyway, we get the white shirt, get that settled. The next week, I came to work, and they called me in the office again. The assistant manager does all the talking. And he says, we're going to give you a break from that filing job, and we want you to follow a van of these secret cars, these Corvairs, out to the tech center so they can take pictures of it. I said, well, hell, I can do that. And he says, Mr. Collison wants you to drive his company car. Well, his company car was a 1959 Chevrolet Impala convertible, red. It was the prettiest car I had ever seen. So anyway, I'm hiding in the company car garage, peeking through the blinds, watching this guy load all these Corvairs. And he finally gets through and gets in, starts his car up, and I'm getting in Mr. Collison's red car to follow him. Well, I think I'm Dick Tracy, and I'm gonna let him get way down the road so he doesn't know that old Neil's following him. And there's two ways of getting to the tech center. One to the left down I-94, and one to the right down Michigan Avenue. Well, I assumed he's going down I-94. That's it. Well, assuming that's what makes an ass out of you and me, right? Well, I don't know there. I'm in this red car. Anyway, I start going down I-94, 10, 15 miles, and I'm looking for this damn truck. Well, there's no truck. Okay. So I speeded it up, and I'm going like 90, 95 miles an hour. And I get all the way down to the airport, and there's no bandwidth. And what he didn't want to happen is the truck driver stop the truck, open the door, and take pictures, because this is a top secret car. So anyway, I realize I've lost it. I turn around and find a telephone. They didn't have cell phones back in the day. And I called the assistant manager again, and I says, hey, I've lost the truck.
They should have fired you.
You almost got your ass fired last week for not wearing a white shirt, and now you've lost 15 Corvair. He says, come on back, and he says, I'll make some phone calls and make sure this guy didn't stop and take pictures. So I did, and that was the end of that story. And as best I can tell, the plant manager never knew that I lost that truck. Nobody ever said a word about it. They just let me go back to file. I'm trying to think where we went.
Go into your tarp story. This is a good.
Go back?
They made you put up tarps.
Well, okay, that's down the road a bit, but we'll jump around here. My advisor is giving me new instructions. All the important stuff happens Monday, see, because these plant managers, they lay awake nights, whatever they do, thinking of new things. So I come in Monday, and he says, go order enough tarps to cover all the cyclone fence around the plant. And go tell the plant, or the purchasing agent to do that. So I go down, and purchasing agents are all the same. Where's your requisition and all that kind of crap. And I look at him and I says, I don't have a requisition, and I'm not going to get one. I says, your boss told me, and if that isn't good enough for you, you call him. See, now, I'm a little bit of a smart ass. That's what I am by nature, but I'm a respectful smart ass. You do it in the right way, you can say anything. And I said, you got to have these things here by Friday, and this is Monday. And he says, well, how many feet? What do you? I says, I'll go measure. So anyway, it's over 3 miles of tarps. You got to have them here by Friday. He had to call all over the United States and still couldn't get enough. So I had to go tell the plant manager, we aren't going to get enough to cover the whole thing. And I said, whatever we do get, where do you want them? He says, well, put them on the main road. He says, Taylor Road, and stretch them as far as they'll go. And I said, okay. So anyway, that's what we did. And what he was trying to do is attract attention to the Corvair. This is like the Tesla today, going on in California. I mean, this is the car, okay? So we get as many tarps as we could, The next week, I am in the office someplace, and all the phones started ringing at the same time. All the ones on the first floor and the second floor. And people coming out of the, what in the hell is going on? Well, there's some guy in a Ford sedan taking pictures through the fence, through the tarp. You know, he apparently slid it. You know, he had to climb through a ditch, but he was in fact, and all the phones ringing. That's those secretaries. They've got their own little internet back in those days, and they're all telling each other. About a week later, or no, 2 days later, on the front page of the Detroit News is a picture of half of a Corvair front fender.
You're in trouble again.
So anyway, I mean, a week or two later, I asked the plant manager. Now, I don't ask the plant manager. He does the talking, I do the listening. Okay, but I said, sir, can I ask you a question? He says, what's that? I says, the Detroit News got the Corvair on the front page, and when I told you about it, I said, you didn't even get mad. I says, weren't you mad? He says, you damn right I was mad. And I says, well, why didn't you swear or something? And he says, you know how much advertising costs for the front page of the Detroit? All you guys know. You all know. And he says it's over $50,000. He says, what did I pay for those tarps? I said, it's $3,200. He says, sounds like I got a hell of a deal. But that's the kind of problem solvers there are at the top. In my 25 years, I worked with a lot of plant managers, and even John DeLorean on a paint improvement thing. And the level of intelligence that those people have is unbelievable. They think of things that us common people have no idea. And he, well, at first he told me, he says, there is no problem that can't be solved, and he's going to make a problem solver. And he did. So anyway, that's enough of that. We need to fast forward. What I've been talking about now is my first 3 months at General Motors before I went to engineering school. And their engineering school it's up there with the top 20 or so. Okay, I like to think the MITs and so on, they're not at that level. But there's 5,000 engineering students at that school, and they're the ones that ran General Motors for a long time. General Motors got out of the education business and sold it to somebody, and it's called Kettering University now, and they're still great. But I give them a lot of credit for me and my meager beginnings, and the plant manager, and my father, who taught me the value of respect. And if you treat people with respect, back in those days, there wasn't a lot of respect. And I brought that with me and turned that organization that built your Corvairs into a damn good assembly plant. And if it wasn't for the engineering problems, the oil leaks and the belts, but there was a lot of others, I'm not ashamed of what we did putting your cars together. And it's testament today that they're out here in the parking lot and you guys are moving the ball down the road. Oh, okay, this is a good one. Well, there's two things. At the end of this story, I had that assembly department working on automatic. They could and would do anything I asked them to do and do it right. They wanted to test me. I thought, no, I'm reading between the lines, I don't know, but my boss called me and he says, come on down here, I got somebody I want you to meet. So I came down there and he introduced me to a man that was 35 years old. He happened to be black, and that has nothing to do with what I'm about to tell you. But this man was blind since birth, since he was 35 years old. And my boss says, find him a job on the assembly line. I'm going to finish this story at the end because it's a master. This guy obviously learned to do the job with no eyes. Well, I'll tell you the rest of that later. Let's go over here and talk about another deal I had with the plant manager. My office was a 4-foot square outside the production office, and that's where I stood every day and waited for my orders. And everybody and their brother wanted me because it was free labor. It wasn't in their budget. So I'm standing there in my square, and here comes the plant manager, and he grabs me by the arm, takes me way down to the far end of the plant, where the bodies are coming from Fisher Body. We don't need to go there. And the plant manager says, see that car over there? And I said, yes, sir. He says, I want you to go learn that job. I said, okay, I can do that. And he says, when you get through with that one, you go to the next one and learn that one. And he says, keep going until they try to put you on a shipping car. And he says, then you're done. But he says, let me tell you one thing. If I ever ask you to do one of these jobs, you damn well better know how to do it. That's pretty clear. I understood that. So anyway, I started doing these jobs, and I'm going to fast forward a little bit, all the way down to final line. And I walk up to this guy, and I said, Johnny, I'm Neil Johnson. And I says, I'm going to learn your job. He says, no, you're not. And I says, really? The plant manager said I was. One of you guys is wrong. And I said, why do you say I'm not going to learn your job? He says, because you're not fast enough, smart enough, or big enough. I said, you're a little smart ass, aren't you? You and I ought to get along just fine. So anyway, well, we almost got in a fight. We literally almost got in a fist fight. And I says, I'll tell you what I'll do. I says, today's payday. I've got a paycheck and you got one. I'll bet you my paycheck is yours that I can do your job. He says, okay. I said, damn, he seems, this guy's something else. I love people that talk back, as long as they're respectful. Because people that talk back know what they're talking about usually. But anyway, I hadn't really learned that yet. So anyway, I start doing the job, and within 3 or 4 job links, I'm so far in the damn hole, I can't even see where home base is. And I cut myself. You see it? That's a scab here. That blue line, that's a 60-year-old scar. And I mean, the blood is just pouring out of it. Down my arm, and I got a pool of blood all over the place. And I tell this guy, come back, and as we passed each other, I reached in my pocket and I hand him my $250 check. Well, what really happened there is all those people, 500 of them, knew that happened. You know, word goes like wildfire out there. And what really happened is those people gained a respect for me. He knows what he's talking about. He means what he says. Neil's a good man, okay? And I am. I'm so honest, it's ridiculous. 15 years later, they needed a superintendent for the department. And all the people find out, well, they signed pieces of paper and they went to, they said, we want Neil to be our superintendent. And they thought about it, you know, hourly people don't tell the personnel department who to hire, but in this case, they did. And things went on from there. Well, that's where I ended up. The union quit coming over to that department because the people made them feel unwelcome. At that time, the union was quite negative towards management. A lot of times we would be doing something to improve something, and their effort would be to undermine us because of where they came from and the way they were brought up. But that's okay. You guys are over there, and they're doing a good job now. I don't want to undermine the quality of the body that they provided, because they did a good job. They just did it different than us Chevrolet people did. Okay, I think that's enough. I covered that whole thing, didn't I?
Well,
Huh?
why couldn't you do the job?
Oh, this is the most important part, and this is, I learned every assembler has got things that they learn to do the job better than management and industrial engineering. They know little things that they've learned. Well, this guy was so smart. The spot welds that held the firewall together were 2 inches apart. And for the most part, you couldn't see them, because if the guy held the spot weld gun squarely and the amperage was adjusted properly, it wouldn't make a mark. It didn't matter. He knew where the things were without seeing them. Well, I didn't. And they may not have been 2 inches and so on. And if you hit a spot weld with a self-drilling screw, it ain't going in. You gotta drill a new hole and drill a new screw. And that's why I couldn't do it. That's why this guy was in fact smarter than I was. And I couldn't do his job, and he's got my 250.
How are we doing on time?
Yeah, maybe 15 minutes.
Oh, 15 minutes.
No, we've already gone through 40 minutes.
You just got like 10 more minutes. You want to finish up a story or something?
Oh, 10 more minutes?
Yeah.
That's
yeah.
all I got. Well, I got a lot more than that, but that's okay. I will be around if you got a question out in the hall and so on. One of your partners I met in the parking lot yesterday, and he has the most beautiful Corvair I've ever seen in my life. Where is he? The guy from Columbus? He must be here.
Sound like Frank Metasavage?
Well, I wanted to show my son where I cut myself and all that on his car, which we talked for at least a half hour. The hell?
He doesn't know what car is the most beautiful car. That's the one he's saying. Some of you guys might have the most beautiful cars.
What color?
There's a lot of them.
We're good with that.
What color was it?
Green?
Frank,
Yeah,
Frank Metasavage.
Huh?
Frank
He's at the
Metasavage.
concourse.
Okay. I mean, he was wonderful, but his car I don't know what y'all got, but his is number one as near as I can see.
That's the only one to see that, guys. Calm down.
I don't see. Oh, but he asked me.
He's not in here.
Oh, he's not in?
Right, he's not in here.
Okay, all right. Well, let me tell you what he asked me. He says, Neil, he says, he saw a Corvair with a tin box, about like a cigar box, on the top of the firewall on the right side on that package shelf. And he says, there's nothing in it. He says, what was the tin box? And I couldn't answer it. But I'm guessing it's when you offered a gasoline heater, that $70 option, that may be where that gasoline heater, no? None of you guys know either.
It was on the 65 Corvair, right?
What?
It was the 65 model of Corvair that had that box, and everybody was trying to figure out what that
Well,
was.
it doesn't matter, but have anybody got a quick question?
What became of, what was the line rate?
The what?
Say it again, Phil.
What was the line rate?
The line rate when I walked in the door was less than 10 jobs an hour. It moved up to either 60 or 65 an hour. That plant always produced cars in the 65 to 70 an hour rate for most of my existence. And if you've never worked an assembly line, that is flying. By the time you pick up your tools, your parts, walk to the job, now that only leaves you 60 jobs an hour to, and that car's moving just like that.
So if you're doing 60 jobs an hour, then you got one a minute that you're doing your,
Yeah.
basically got one a minute.
What do you remember from May 14th, 1969?
Okay.
The last day.
Do it one more time.
May 14th, 1969. What do you remember from that day? The last day they went out.
I don't know, well, I was not there, or I would remember the last day. I may have been off at school or what have you, but there's a lot that happened over there that happened. Oh, I didn't,
Go ahead, Neil.
this is one more story that's worth remembering. Maybe 6 months into my employment, they asked me if I would mind going out to the loading dock and doing the clerk's job because they couldn't find anybody else to do it. And they never told me why, but once I got there, I figured out for myself, you had to fly to do that damn job, whoever came up with. But that's where they were loading the Corvairs on box cars, which wasn't a lot of production. Well, I mean, hell, there was 50 people out there putting a Corvair in a boxcar. Well, you've got to put it in at a certain angle in order to get it to fit through the door, and the clearance on each side was 2 inches. Okay, so a man's got to back the car in, look over his shoulder, and not hit the boxcar, or you're going to scratch the Corvair. So the plant manager came out, like I told you, he's like my big brother. He watches me like a hawk, and he pulls me aside and he says, Neil, wouldn't it help these guys if we painted some lines on the floor to help guide them at the right angles to get it in without scratching it? And I give him my 18-year-old answer, well, I guess it was. You used to be 18, right?
Neil, the last year the Corvair was made, 68, 69. Can you talk a little bit about what it was like when you were making that last year 69 on the same line as the Nova, and then moved it back into the Corvair build room that last year?
You talk about your retooling, how that, when production stalled, they had to retool the plant to make room for the Nova and the X bodies.
Well, Okay,
how you were involved in that?
I don't remember, you know, I've been in these assembly plants so much and I've seen so much, I can't, I'm 82 years old. I can't really answer that.
The blind guy. Can you finish that story?
The blind guy. They want to know what happened to the blind guy.
One more time.
Your blind worker that you trained,
Oh, okay.
they'd like to know what
No,
happened.
they asked me if I would take this job. So the first thing I did was take him up to my office and I says, you need to explain what it means to me to be blind. I says, I've never been blind. I don't know what I'm up against. And he says, well, he says, I'm legally blind according to the federal government. But he says, I can see blurs. Everything is gray. Nothing necessarily has a shape that I can identify with. I says, okay, I understand. I went home and thought about it for a couple of days, and I said, I think they got me this time. This is something I can't, I can't do this way. But there is no problem that can't be solved. So anyway, I went back and I took 4 employees off the motor line, which there was 65 of them on the front half of the motor line and 50 on the back half. And incidentally, to show you, how, these are the kind of things you don't know, but all those 65 were from Pike County, Kentucky. How in the hell did that happen? Well, the supervisor figured out how good those people are from Pike County, Kentucky. And every time one came through the door, he figured out a way to get him on his line. And he did that. Okay, now we're getting back to the blind man. I told those 4 people, I said, this is the problem. I said, you guys do in fact know more about your jobs than anybody, including me, and I'm just head of the department. I don't know anything. And I says, I want you to take parts of your job, and I'm going to give you an office and time, and you take your job and donate whatever part you think a blind man will be able to do, and we'll find something else for you guys to do. I said, will you do that? And a lot of people look down at people on assembly lines. You know, the people that are content to do repetitive, okay. That doesn't mean they're dumb. And I have the utmost respect for all people. And they all have value and they all can contribute. So anyway, these guys come up with this job. Oh, and the next day after I gave them that, I see one of them out in the parking lot welcoming this guy, whoever drove him to work, help him out of it, take him by the hand and lead him across the assembly plant so he doesn't fall in a pit or something. They really took hold of this job and they made the job something he could do. Now, if I ask you all how long you think it took him to learn it, as smart as you guys are, there isn't one of you that's going to be able to tell me how long it took him to learn that job. And I don't see anybody raising their hand, but it doesn't matter because you can't do it anyway. It took him 3 months. And the reason it took him 3 months is he didn't have any muscle. He never used them in his entire life. And he knocked on my door at my office and came in. I don't even remember his name. And he's got tears running out of those blind eyes. I didn't know tears could come from eyes. Eyes are for seeing. Okay. But he says, Neil, I want to thank you for the job and the opportunity. He says, my wife, who washes dishes, she's a paraplegic. Is that the proper word? Paraplegic. And she can quit her job, and I can be the sole provider. Okay. That is my crowning achievement. And I don't know of any other assembly plant in the United States, or maybe even the world, that has ever put a blind man on an assembly line. And that's, he wasn't assembling your Corvairs, but it's the same people. It's the same organization. And that's the mentality that has allowed this. And I thank you all for perpetuating that. This country needs more of this. What you got?
Last question.
What was he doing? His job. What was the
What
job?
was your job title?
The blind man.
Blind man. Blind man, what was he doing?
What was the job title of the blind man?
Assembler?
Assembler.
What did he assemble?
What was his,
He couldn't remember his name.
no, what was he putting together?
Oh, the brackets and stuff that is relatively repetitive on every, I mean, we didn't have V8s and 6 cylinders and so on. It was, they're all the same.
Yeah.
Or when you pick them up, you could feel them. They're the same. But you know, that had an effect on those other 60 people on that line. I mean, they,
That's teamwork.
Teamwork. She said that's teamwork.
yeah, well, well, and my professor at General Motors Institute, he says there's 3 things you need for success: leadership, teamwork, and problem solving. And he says that applies to sports and industry, politics, and that's all you need. If you've got people that will work together, and we're not gonna go into that, because I see a lot of opinions out here, and we might have a different. We're here to talk about the Corvair, and we've done a fair job of that.
Okay. Anyway, thank you, Neil. Thanks very, very much.